Okay, so good morning. Today we are going to do ethics module number 2, and we are going to look at our social media. We're going to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to look at how does social media influence my work with not only students, but also with our coworkers, and then how do interactions with students and coworkers influence laws and policies. So this is what we're going to learn. We're going to articulate effective uses of social media. We are going to gain an understanding of the appropriate and inappropriate behavior. We're going to look at what does grooming mean in the world of social media, and we're going to make a connection between social media and then our rules, guidelines, policies. So we all see what positive social media can do in our district. For me personally, our cover stories this year are being shared through little Twitter minute to 2-minute videos. We're trying to showcase some of the social-emotional stuff going on in the classroom, some great teaching. So we know that that positive influence, another teacher might be able to get an idea from another teacher or from another administrator. So we know that sharing our story is positive. So how can the utilization of social media by educators cross the boundaries of student-teacher relationships or teacher-to-teacher? So boundary crossing. We tend to think there are things we do with students that might be not appropriate or that are appropriate that will turn into not appropriate, which you'll be able to tell by this statement right here. So can you, Diana, read this for us?
I began playing Words with Friends with several students before the end of the school year, including Gabriella. I often chatted with students about the game. My conversations began innocently, but after school let out in June, my conversations with Gabriella became more intense.
So, a simple Words with Friends game turns into this. Talisa, can you read this?
I told my wife that I had an emotional relationship with Gabriella and it moved beyond an appropriate boundary between a teacher and a student. My wife was angry and demanded that I terminate contact with Gabriella entirely. I then emailed Gabriella and asked her to not try and contact me or my wife, and I apologized for any emotional harm I had caused her.
So something innocent went to something inappropriate. Actually, this scenario, not only did it go from Words from Friends, but it also went to other platforms on like apps like Kik, which are encoding like secret messaging back and forth. So just be aware of all that stuff. If you're a parent, make sure you know what's on your kids' phones, because there are a lot of apps out there that you can send secret messages to people. So then, what was the outcome of this case? This teacher decided to forfeit his teaching certificate. He surrendered it, and not only did that happen, but he got 60 years in prison. Let that sit in. Words with Friends to 60 years. This is mind-blowing to me. 15 times every week in this country, inappropriate misconduct happens. 15 times every week. So with your thought partner, or someone across from you, look at this question. Is social media to blame for inappropriate student-teacher or teacher-teacher relationships? I'm going to give you a minute to talk about that.
So we know that this goes on, and it's really easy to say, this won't happen in my district. That's some other district and some other part of Texas. It doesn't happen here. People in our district know the difference between right and wrong, or this is common sense. Why would anybody think this is okay? I've only been here 2 years, and we have had this on multiple occasions in our district, believe it or not. It's shocking what would put this idea in someone's head, especially in the area that we live in, our neighbors, our community, very well educated, but this does happen. It happens in Coppell ISD. And we see it more and more often that we are investigating situations like this within our state, and there's even rules that TEA has now that school districts are required to report this to the state so that the state can do further investigations, and teaching certificates are getting revoked because of this situation. And as Adam had said, there's so many ways that students, employees can communicate. It used to just be text, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, but there's a variety of things that come out daily that people can use in order to communicate so that it's not easily trackable. In fact, we've had employees in our district who have used these types of apps in a seemingly innocent communication between each other. And it's all innocent, it's consensual until it's not. And the other person or one person that's been communicating back and forth using social media decides that it's no longer reciprocal, they don't want it to happen anymore. And then these text messages, these social media sites have already been captured and are then brought to the district for investigations. So we do talk about the focus between students and employees because the severity of that in losing your livelihood and your teaching certificate is very real. But in our district, we have had this same situation with employee-to-employee interactions between social medias that at first seemed appropriate and it was reciprocal until it wasn't. And then these messages and these conversations that have happened between the two of them, have cost individuals dearly. So it leaves a digital footprint. There's often misconception that if you use things like Snapchat that after 10, 15 seconds it goes away. That's not the case. It's a misconception. We had incidences last year that had to be investigated with employees using Snapchat with students, and it was saved because you just really never know what that other person is doing with that information and how it's being saved. There's even ways for us to get information even if it hasn't been saved. So just know when you're communicating this with your staff that even if they think there's a way that they will never be able to have access to it, that's not the case. So we're going to watch a video scenario, and then we're going to have some discussions about this scenario. So what are some thoughts on that, what you saw?
I'm going to just say the obvious, but just because I feel like we need to get it on record, it doesn't happen just between male teachers and female students or female teachers and male students. We've had incidents where the attraction or the interaction is between same sex, so an awareness of that. When it comes to adults, we always have to consider what the relationship is and what the job responsibilities are, and is it peer-to-peer or supervisor-to-peer? Those are some things that have to be considered and investigated. And sometimes we get entangled in adult issues because it's educator to parent or educator to vendor, or employee to vendor, or so this really is broader than just the classroom. And while the state focuses on the classroom because the majority of our customers are our students and the majority of our employees are educators, we see this infiltrate at all levels. And so this really is a serious discussion, even when the videos are staged and can feel a little hokey. Those are conversations that take place in our district and others around us, and so this is very, very serious. And so thank you for considering that.
So as you probably know, statistics are on the rise with investigations. In fact, Doug Phillips, who's the Director of Educator Investigations with TEA, here on this slide wanted everyone to know that there's been a 99% increase in investigations that his team is having to investigate in the last 7 years. So you can imagine how busy they are in conducting investigations when these things are reported. Also, I wasn't sure if you were aware, it is a requirement, like you probably know, that we report to TEA if we suspect an educator has been involved in some misconduct. But starting in January 2020, we're also now required to report to TEA if any school district employee, regardless if you have a certificate or not, has engaged in any type of misconduct. And so they're creating a do not hire list. And so the do not hire list would be a list of individuals that are no longer able to be employed in any district across the state of Texas. Whether you're a certified educator or you are non-certified but you're working in a school district, it's going to be a comprehensive list of everyone. So that will be something our office will have to make sure we are doing our due diligence, is that when we get recommendations for employment, we're checking that do not hire list, whether it be food service, clerical, paraprofessional, educator, principal, anyone. We would need to check that to make sure that there hasn't been a previous investigation that found misconduct on that person. This is just some statistics that's happened since 1617. I'm sure as we have gotten the last 3 years, you probably could imagine there's more open cases with inappropriate relationships between students and staff. In fact, that number 188, when we were trained, it was said that 100 of those 188 cases led to some type of criminal offense and arrest. So 100 out of 188 that were investigated led to some type of arrest. So you don't want to tread on dangerous ground. It's better to just protect yourself and don't put that risk out there. If our employees can just stop and just think before acting, could this behavior be considered risky? Whether it's with a student, whether it's with another employee, just stop and think before proceeding. And you know, we have not necessarily been trained in all the social media that's out there and available to us. Social media apps come at us every week, and we utilize them, as Adam said, for educational, and they can be great resources for us, but they can also be negative too. And so educating yourself and being trained on what the apps actually do are so important, because a lot of us just use them without actually knowing the ramifications that using them could lead to. And then we talk about grooming. So grooming is what we call inappropriate actions that actually lead to the inappropriate relationships. And it can be with students, but it can also be with other employees. Like I said before, those friendly conversations that you're having with employees about what they did over the weekend and what their kids are involved in could lead to dangerous ground and could be considered grooming. It can just be frequent calls or sending text messages just to check in, which is totally appropriate, and we want that to happen. But what happens after that? Are we going down the rabbit hole of something that could lead to inappropriate behavior? Sending jokes, pictures, inappropriate information, sending messages that are increasingly becoming more friendly and more private, could be more sexual in nature. Those are the types of behaviors that we consider grooming behaviors, which are grooming someone to fall into that inappropriate relationship that could happen down the road. So I'm going to turn it over to, and conducting social media interactions in secrecy. If it needs to be private, then it's probably inappropriate. If you wouldn't show a parent, a principal, a spouse, a friend, this text message that you're sending, it's probably inappropriate. So I'm going to turn it over to Ro, and she's going to discuss inappropriate versus appropriate.
So Adam, Kelly, and Kristen have already covered a lot of information so far. What I would like to do next is conduct just a quick check for understanding on appropriate versus inappropriate communication. In a few minutes, I'm going to read a couple of text message examples between a teacher and a student. But before we do that, and before I click off this picture here, I'd like for you to just look at this for just a second. When I look at this picture, several thoughts immediately comes to mind. All right, and these are going to be all assumptions that I'm having here. You may look at this and be like, well, I don't see all of that, but this is just what comes to my mind here. All right, I see what appears to be two professional gentlemen, perhaps a supervisor and an employee, and I guess either of these gentlemen can have that title, but just for my example, I'll say that the older gentleman is the supervisor. When I look at the body language and facial expressions, I'm assuming, and I could be reaching here, but I'm assuming that the older gentleman has probably had an intense conversation with the younger gentleman. Are y'all kind of seeing that so far? Okay, perfect. When I look at the younger gentleman, he has his head down. He actually has his head in his hand. And he's just coming across as thinking, holy smoke, I have probably done something that I now regret. And then in the middle is an open laptop. And this doesn't look like the supervisor's maybe taking notes. I am taking this as perhaps the supervisor has brought something to his communication, possibly some inappropriate communication. And as Kristen and Kelly mentioned earlier, the majority of the slides will reference teacher and student interactions. But as professional employees, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that we have to maintain appropriate communication as well. Again, when I looked at this, another case came to mind. I swear I'm going to turn it in just a second. But another case came to mind. I won't say the district, but it's a neighboring district. They had a very high-level employee that was forced to resign. And as I share this story, you may start thinking, okay, well, I kind of remember this case because it was all over the news media. It was all in the, I almost said it was in the newspaper, news media, everything. That employee was forced to resign because their instant messages were made open to the public. They did an investigation. And I'll just share with you briefly, I have it pulled up here. In those instant messages, she poked fun at employees based on race, religion, and age, bullied employees, threatened employees, just all type of inappropriate things. She was allowed to issue an apology, and I'll just read the first line. In communications, which is what we are discussing today, that I mistakenly considered private, and I won't read the rest. Kelly mentioned, you know, sometimes we're thinking, oh, it's deleted, it's never gonna be discovered. It absolutely can be discovered. It is www, the World Wide Web for a reason, so nothing is gone. So just be mindful of that, because I know none of us in this room would want to be sitting across from our supervisor because it's been discovered that we have been inappropriate in our own communication, not just with students, but with each other. So here is the example text message. This is from Mrs. Z. Hi, Mike. Be a doll and send me your late assignment. I'm waiting. Mike, I've been busy. Can we make a deal? Mrs. Z, depends on how good the deal is, babe. I'll Snapchat you with a great deal. What alarm bells are going off? Now I heard all the snickering as I was going through the text message. I'm looking at facial expressions, right? What are your thoughts? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about this text message. Just kind of spit them out, please.
I just want to know what deal we're talking about here.
Right, what deal are we talking about?
Yeah.
Right, anyone else?
Pet names, you shouldn't be texting, the whole thing is inappropriate.
Everything about this is inappropriate. You're absolutely correct. Who initiated this string of text messages? The teacher did. was not professional. She clearly crossed the boundary with the student, and the teacher is the one that opened the door to inappropriate banter. But again, remember, as employees, as co-workers, you guys could also have inappropriate banter. So just be mindful of that, especially if you're doing anything online. It could be pulled up. We're going to read another example. So this is Mrs. Z again. Hello, Mike. A quick reminder to send me your assignment. It was due yesterday. Mike, thank you, Ms. C. I will send today. Sorry it's late. Mrs. Z, your graded paper will be posted to your school Dropbox account. Was this message okay? Yes or no? Compared to the first text. I'd like to hear your thoughts. What do you think?
Shouldn't be texting.
Shouldn't be texting.
But there's nothing wrong with it.
But there's nothing wrong with the content. I'm seeing some head nods there.
Should not be texting.
Should not be texting. Anyone else? So what aspects of this text message, because she mentioned that the content was appropriate, but they still should not be text message, what aspects of this interaction provides evidence of more of an appropriate communication?
Directly related to the teacher's responsibilities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I don't know if you remember the first text message, it was, hi Mike. This first one was, hello Mike, right? And to me, I took that as she is letting him know that she means business right off the bat. She mentioned, I'm going to grade your late assignment, so there was no mention of any type of negotiation. She didn't even open up the door of any possible negotiation. So compared to the first one, this one was a little bit more, I guess, kind of to the point. This is what you're going to get. It's late, and I guess if additional conversations needed to happen afterwards, I could see it still continuing in a more professional manner than the first text message. So what would you do? I would like for you to turn to your elbow partner, give you 45 seconds. What would you do if you received either inappropriate text messages, emails from a student, and if you're not on a campus, what if you are starting to receive inappropriate messages from another employee? How would you handle that? 45 seconds, please. People that would like to share out first? Anyone would like to go first? Yes, please.
So we all work at the business office, so we don't work with students, but we were all saying that if an employee or fellow coworker was communicating with us inappropriately, we would all probably address it with that individual and let them know how uncomfortable that is. And if the act continued, then we would reach out to someone of a higher power.
Absolutely.
But initially, we all kind of just take care of it ourselves.
I mean, I think adults can handle themselves, and I don't think it needs to go all the way up. I think people have the ability to say, leave me alone.
Right.
And if the person doesn't,
Right.
there's other ways to handle it.
And the good thing is that it would be online or on text message, so it's already documented if indeed it did have to move up. Thank you all for sharing that. Can I have another table share out, please?
Can I address that
Yes,
though? Because I do, and while I want to say adults are always going to act like adults and handle it, experience, experience is not that. And so I think, again, I appreciate, and even as we talked about in the sexual harassment training, you have to set those boundaries for yourself and say that this makes me uncomfortable. But I think you should always somehow document that and say what's made you uncomfortable. Hopefully that conversation adult to adult will put an end to that, but it doesn't always. And as I said, sometimes it's easier to do that when it's an equal or a colleague versus your supervisor. And so again, we always have to weigh that. And so while I appreciate that, I just want to caution that there's not, and you didn't say this, but I just want to say that it's not a weakness, you're not troubling someone. It's our job and your supervisor's job to be there to support you. And so Social media makes it very easy, not only for teachers and students, but for employee to employee. And so I just didn't want to leave without saying that, and making sure that, we handle it. And you can say, well, it's 2 consenting adults, but many times when we start to look at the pattern, and even if they remain consenting adults, it's happening during work hours, it's happening when they're supposed to be, completing their tasks in the communications office or teaching in the classroom or whatnot. So again, sometimes it's all about when these communications are taking place as well, when it involves 2 adults.
Thank you. One more table, share out, please. Anyone?
I actually have something to ask about that.
Okay.
If it's 2 consenting adults that just happen to work together and they're doing their communication after hours, that gets to me real gray. I mean, yeah, you met them at work, but
And we're not going to get into that. So 2 consenting adults after work hours, whatever. I don't want to know what they're sharing. I'm not going to ask them. But yeah, and that happens. And we've had marriages take place in the district, and so that's private. And
at what point can the person get mad and say, "Leave me alone," and then the district steps in when it's still after hours? I mean, everybody gets if stuff happens during work. Okay, it's somebody's business here, but when things happen after hours between consenting adults and one person gets ticked off, and I mean, where is the line there?
When they keep it outside of work, even when they're ticked off, and that's my point. And unfortunately, we have situations where, because one person is not happy that the relationship is ending, or someone, that they carry it into work, and it becomes a disruption because they're talking to colleagues about it, or they're not able to perform their job responsibilities. And so that's when we get involved. But again, it is a delicate situation because basically the initial conversation is asking them to keep their private business private and handle it outside of the work hours. So you're right. If they can do it all good, bad, or otherwise outside of it, it's not our business, and we don't choose or care to go there.
You don't have any video of that?
Well, that's not always the case either, but again,
So I'll go ahead and move forward. I think we've covered that. We just have to remember as educators to hold firm to boundaries, and that's with students or if it's with other employees. Find ways to redirect inappropriate behavior, setting those boundaries, as Kristen again mentioned, because it can start to blur those lines if you don't set clear boundaries. And then again, they're talking about boundaries again. That shows you that it's important, keeping those clear boundaries between ourselves and our students, and this also applies to us as adults at all times outside of school. Okay, so TEA has provided us with guidance on how to determine whether or not online communication with the student is inappropriate. And so the next few slides could be factors that you could consider when assessing whether or not communication is inappropriate. What was the nature, purpose, timing, and amount of the communication? And we'll see what the district says about the timing of the communication in just a bit. Was the communication made openly, or did the educator attempt to conceal it? I guess I am kind of the opinion, when I go back to Mrs. Z's text message, especially the first one, that is not something that she would be okay with having in the Dallas Morning News or on Channel 4 or Channel 5 or so. So just be in mindful of that. Are you okay with this information being made public? If you're not, if you got some little red flags, don't do it, don't send it. Could the communication be interpreted as soliciting contact or romantic relationships? Was the communication sexually explicit? Did it involve discussion of a sexual nature regarding either the educator or the student? And again, if this is happening kind of here within the district between employees, and one employee is feeling uncomfortable, then this would be applicable to you. If we go back to Mrs. Z's first thread of text messages. She clearly violated an ethical standard, and we don't want to do that. There was secrecy in her communication. It had a sexual connotations, even though the word sex was not used. She just set the tone for it to turn quickly down the lines of some type of romantic relationship, if that would have continued. And just a quick reminder for those of you who will be taking this back to your campus, per CISD policy regarding communication with the students, and I'll just skim through this, but this can be found on page 34 of the employee handbook. It is inappropriate to use any social media site to communicate with the student. I'll go down to the last bulletin. CISD employees may not text a student unless a parent has given them written permission to do so, and it tells you where you can locate the form. Contact cannot occur between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 o'clock a.m. And then any text that's sent out to the student must also include the parent, and the employee then has to send a copy of that text message to their CISD account. And again, this can be found on page 34 of the employee handbook. I will turn it over to Ms. Jennifer.
So is there any type of consensual relationship between a student and an employee?
No.
What if they're 18?
No, they're still a student.
Right. So the law is pretty specific, and it says that there is no such thing as a consensual relationship between a student and an employee. And so when we're looking at that, as Kelly mentioned earlier, Senate Bill 7 requires us to report. And again, in 2020, we'll be required to report all employees if there is an inappropriate relationship to TEA. Loss of career, but also your loss of your freedom. Those are things that can be devastating. They can be devastating emotionally to your family, also to your career. So if you're in this career for 30 years and you're texting a student, what are you going to be remembered for? Are you going to be remembered for your 30 years of service or the mistake that you made? Think about that for a second. Think in your mind too, we've all seen different stories in the news and in the media about teachers, employees. We are held to a very high ethical standard. And so we've all seen stories where something has gone viral, or it's an opinion, or the relationship with a student might not be a romantic relationship. It might be inappropriate because of mistreatment towards that student as well, okay? So there's variations of inappropriate behavior towards your students. We also want to look at social media. How many of you have a virtual footprint? Who doesn't have a virtual footprint? Who is not on any?
Naveen.
So Naveen might be the only one that doesn't have a virtual footprint, but he is our webmaster.
What if you don't use your real name? Is that a social footprint or not? It's tied back to you.
It is, and there's actually some guidance on creating a false account, so we don't want to go there either. So if you have questions about that, let's talk privately.
No, I mean, if you don't publish your full name. It's not a false
If they
account,
can
but
link it
it's-
to you, whether you use a nickname or another name. So remember that when you're not just representing yourself. Again, we are held to a higher level of basically our code of ethics. So if you look at policy DH in the employee handbook, it's around page 4950 as well. It talks about our responsibility as employees, and it's the employee standards of employment. So DH local goes over that for our district, but it does talk about providing, you know, basically a persona of, you really can't do anything that would interfere with your ability to perform your job. So let's say that I wrote a hot check, but I am consistently, I've written hot checks, let's say, but I'm in the purchasing department. Would that maybe interfere with my ability to do my job or the integrity, the way it looks? So it's different things like that. So if I were in HR and I had an inappropriate relationship with someone I supervised, would that maybe taint or interfere with my ability to be in my role in HR? Because in HR, what do you investigate? The very same things, right? So would I be able to be a neutral party to actions such as that? So really, it's making sure that it doesn't interfere with the integrity of your position as well. So social media, you just want to be aware of what you post. I call this, I use the grandmother rule. So if it's something that I would not want to share with my grandmother, I don't post it, right? So follow your district's policy. Rochelle went over our policy slightly. So when can you not have communication with students? Right. And should we really have communications with one another, peer-to-peer, from 11 to 5?
No.
Not unless it's an emergency, right? So Justin does not want to get a text from me at 11:30 at night asking about a vendor or status of something, right? We want to make sure that we are transparent and we're open about our virtual footprint as well. The Washington Post actually has reported that there's a superintendent in that area in Chicago that asks every applicant to see their Facebook and Twitter account. So consider all electronic communication to be accessible. Why would that be important? At any given time, what can happen? Right. And just make sure that you are, again, representing yourself, but also your employment, especially if you have the district's name or it says you're employed by on your profile, okay? So think about your own virtual footprint and think about all of the things that you may or may not have wanted to share with your grandma that you may have posted. And people that know me outside of work also know that if I choose to partake with an adult beverage, you will never see that in my picture. I always move them around the menu or out of sight just because, again, that would be something that I would not want to interfere with my position or my role. So consider all of those things, you guys. Reflect on your guidelines. Reflect on DH local. If you don't know where that is, make sure that you pull that. The teacher code of ethics is also in that area. And we go over these things with our teachers. And it's usually in August. What happens in August on campus? And in our departments. Budget starts up when? September 1st. Kids come back August. Teachers come back in August. We're busy. They're busy. So we're throwing a lot of information at everybody. So just make sure that when you are training them, that you have a focus on this as well. You're going to be taking this training back to them, so it's a good reminder. Remember to report anything. If you see something that kind of looks a little odd, if you see a staff member kissing a child on the cheek, that may not be their child, right? You don't know. So you can always report. Just make sure that all interaction is something that you would find appropriate. And if you have questions, err on the side of caution and report. Think about who you would report to if you saw something in your department that was questionable, a relationship, whether it's peer-to-peer or staff to student. Do you have that person in your mind? Remember, we have a zero tolerance for unethical behavior and relationship. In Schoology, there is a performance task once you go through this training with your staff that you will walk them through, okay? And that folder is in the administrative folder. All right, y'all ready to reflect? If you have any questions, I'm going to invite the crew back up here. While you have us all here, do y'all have any reflections about the training? Any additional ahas or things that you think you might need additional information on?
Can you guys talk to kind of the balance of rights between being a private individual with social media and being a public employee? And what are the free speech rights versus you work for a public entity?
Well, and I think as Kristen said earlier, we will get cases where teachers, if they post something on their social media account or they say something on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram that they say that I was doing that outside of the job. I was on vacation with my family and we were having a good time, and so I posted some pictures. That's my right to do that. But what they fail to remember is that when that comes back to the school district and we have had reports of that individual posting pictures online with their adult beverages, or maybe they were in swimsuits and they were posting that, we have to look at what effect that picture or what that person said has on their job performance. And we have to look at whether or not, because of what they posted, has the district, has the parents, have the students in their classroom, has that been diminished, their confidence in that employee, has that been diminished as a result of what we saw online? Is their ability to do their job been diminished because now we know what we've seen, what we've heard, what has been reported? Have they lost confidence in that educator? Have they lost confidence in that employee to be able to do their job because what has been posted? And so while yes, we don't give up our free speech rights when we're out on our own private time, but we have to think, what are my actions going to be viewed negatively by my employer? Has my employer lost the ability in me to do my job effectively? If you're a high school teacher and you're teaching high school seniors and you go to a club and your clubbing pictures are posted online, what are your high school seniors going to think about you when you come back to class? Are your students going to look differently when they see those pictures posted? Are the parents going to think differently about that educator when they come back to school? So just be mindful. You haven't lost your free speech rights, but think about what type of perception you have now as the educator once you've posted that.
And kind of, can you speak to along those lines of, gosh, it is such a pain. I just really only want to manage one Twitter account or one Facebook account or one Instagram account. Can I do that? Can I have one for school that I also do personal things for? Because I'm just not on it that much.
Yes, and we do hear that. And we use Twitter and we use social media for educational purposes because we want to showcase the great things that we do in our district. We have Twitter chats because we want to learn and grow from each other. We want our students to follow and be able to learn from things that we post and resources that we post. But you have to be careful with that too. If you're intermingling your personal and your professional with one social media account, you have to be mindful of who your friends are. Are you friending students on your personal account that they're able to see? Are you friending your parents? Are you allowing those things to happen where they see more of your personal interactions and what you do on the weekends versus your school account? So we always encourage all employees, if you're going to use social media for educational purposes, but you also have personal things that you want to post because of your families and things like that and great things your kids are doing, it's best to keep those separate. You don't want to blur the lines between personal and professional so that your parents are following personal accounts, your students are following personal accounts, and are able to, you're putting yourself in a situation where they could potentially see something that you don't want everyone seeing. So that's why it's always important that if you're going to do social media for professional reasons, do the professional accounts. And I know all of our schools have personal accounts, and a lot of our educators here use social media for great reasons, and they have their own school accounts. So we want to continue to do that. Just be careful you don't blur the lines between personal and professional.
There is now a new Senate Bill 944 that is making us now, if you do have school accounts, that we have to capture all of those accounts in case there is like an open records request. So we're still in the works because that's a brand new Senate bill, but we are trying to find a new solution where we can now take all of those social media accounts and be able to put them into a platform to capture all of the things that are being said on our social media pages.
Can I add one piece to that?
Yeah.
So we are working with technology and we're in the process of finding that solution. And it's going to be imperative that we have separate, just like Kelly said, it's going to be imperative that our educators have separate Twitter, Facebook accounts separate from their own personal ones. Because in essence, we're going to be capturing everything they post. And so if they don't want us posting or capturing their family vacation photos, it's going to have to be separate because we're going to be grabbing everything that they post in this certain account. So we're in the process of writing some new kind of recommendations, guidelines that we'll be sharing. Again, just because it's Senate Bill 944, but just know that we're going to have to actually push that button and say you have to separate it, or we're going to be having your family photos captured.
Good questions. Any other questions? Romree?
So just had a couple of questions over here. So when any of that happens through the district, is there some process or whatever that people will go through, kind of like a disclosure and say, yes, you can have access to blah, blah, blah?
Yes, there will be. The truth is, if you're using it for school business, the law says we have access, period. We don't even have to ask you. Because the law is very clear. If you're using it for school business, we automatically, actually the law says you have to give it to us. So the onus is on the educator or is on the employee. In this, it's actually not on the school district. We're doing this to facilitate it, but yes, we're working through that process. It's going to matter which product we go with. So we're speaking with several companies right now to kind of figure out how to do that. It's actually, there's going to be other pieces that fall under it, and we'll have a lot of training to talk through it, and it will impact everybody. Don't let all of that out yet, because we're not there yet. Just know that we're working through it. Every district in the state is working through it.